playground. Hooray!
Hey, it's Jeff Zito and another episode of Celebrity Jobber I bring you. And this week's guest, a good one because I don't really know a whole lot about him. I know Bomani Jones from being on ESPN and the show Highly Questionable with Dan Le Batard. Both Bomani Jones and Dan Le Batard both became familiar to me from that show. But honestly, I don't know anything about Bomani Jones. I do know he's got a new show on HBO, but really nothing about where he's from, how he grew up, his mom and dad. And of course, what I really like getting into on this podcast is your first job, because everybody had that first job. And sometimes that first job could relate somehow to what you're doing today, celebrity or not. Sometimes celebrities that got famous a little bit later on in life had regular jobs. Like a few episodes back, talking to Todd LaTorre, who's now the lead singer of the band Queensryche. He had an upholstery business. He also did like insurance claims. And then he was about 35. He gets the call from Queensryche to say, hey, you want to be our lead singer? Just a regular guy before that even happened. So before the world of sports broadcasting, what about Bomani Jones? Was he a regular guy? What did he do? His first job, his big break. Or maybe could think about if it wasn't for his current occupation, what he thinks he might be doing. I could tell you, if I wasn't in the radio business, in the broadcast business, doing a podcast, I would probably have ended up in the golf business, because that's what I did. Yeah, I'm from a golfing family. My brother was a club professional. I ended up working with him for a little while, and who knows, could still be stuck doing that. But ended up getting my own radio show. Now I got this podcast. That's well in my rearview mirror. So let's find out more about Bomani Jones, my guest this week on Celebrity Jobber. How's it going, man?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I got a lot of questions for you. I hope you've got the time.
Yep, all good.
Well, first off, I wanted to know, where'd you grow up?
I was born in Atlanta. I grew up in Houston, and I went back to college in Atlanta. So it's a little bit of that combination.
Okay, and what about growing up? Tell me a little bit about growing up in your household, your mom, your dad, that whole scene when you were younger.
Well, I grew up with a very interesting hodgepodge of circumstances. My parents are college professors, but I would definitely say the people I grew up going to school with, their parents were not really college professors. My parents are veterans of the Civil Rights Movement. I would say that my neighbors certainly were not. So my growing up is really a lot of in-between worlds type stuff. I'm good at navigating between them. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm perfectly at home in any of them, and for that reason, I am perfectly at home everywhere.
Well, you might have been the guy that didn't get away with anything growing up.
Nah, that wasn't. I could get away with a few things, but let me tell you what you weren't getting away with: poor logic.
Wow,
that was the thing that you weren't getting away with in that house.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine growing up, you might have had to really watch it.
Yeah. Well, the thing about my parents, though, is, like, especially growing up when I did in the 80s, like, the easy comparison that they make when your black people got jobs, they immediately, like, go to a Cosby Show, Huxtable type of situation. But we're not bourgeois in that form of fashion. No, like, I don't think that me growing up honestly felt that much terribly different than going to other people's houses, except my parents just a little bit cooler. That was all.
Right. Now, did they discourage you? Forget educated. They're very educated people. I mean, my parents are not that educated, not even close. So they probably wouldn't have discouraged me from a life of broadcasting and or sports. But when did your love of sports come into play? And did your parents try to move you in a more academic direction?
Well, I tried to go to the academic direction myself before I went full bore into the sport. So I gave it a try. I was in a PhD program in economics at the University of North Carolina. I got a master's degree ultimately from them, and I got a master's degree also from Claremont Graduate University, which is to say I gave it a go. It did not work out so well for me on the PhD program, and that's when I went full on into the sports thing. And there was never any level of discouraging me from it. A, because they saw that I was really into it, and B, I think they thought that I was good at it. And so once you got those two things put together, I then went and found a way to kind of combine all the things I had done academically with the sports stuff. And so now I would say that my dad is my biggest fan at this point.
Wow. Well, what was it, Bomani? What was it that you tried to go into that didn't work out?
Oh, I was doing a PhD in economics, and the thing about it that I didn't really realize is the master's degree that I had done before, which was tied largely to economics, was much more qualitative. The thing I was doing at Carolina was much more quantitative. We're just cranking out math and doing algebra all the time. And that right there was not what I thought that I was signing up for, and that didn't really hold my interest. And I think the thing that I ultimately realized is I had a master's degree level of curiosity about economics. It wasn't a PhD level of curiosity. And, man, if you want a PhD, you got to want it. That ain't one of those things that you just kind of like, I guess. Like, you got to be all the way in on it. And I honestly was not.
Yeah, I would imagine. What drove you, man? I mean, that seems like, when you're younger, I've got a son in college and just starting to click to him right now. Like, hey, I got to try. I got to get good grades. I got to get a good job. Like, how did you get on that path at such an early age and you weren't distracted?
Well, to be fair, it's largely natural ability, if I'm being honest, because I didn't really try until I got to graduate school, and then I realized, oh, man, I needed to learn how to try a lot sooner.
Really?
You know what I mean? Like learning how to study and how to do all those things that I had skipped over came back to bite me in the keister by the time I actually got around to it. But no, it's just like doing what you need to do is always something that I've been pretty grounded in. Like I did a TED Talk a few years ago, and I centered it around the idea that if you just do what you're supposed to do, after that you can do whatever you want. And so I figured that out pretty early. Just do what you gotta, and then from there you can have all the fun. And that's really my approach, honestly, in content also. Like there's certain beats that you got to hit, and once you hit those, it's your world.
So tell me a little bit about the transition into sports. I wanted to know, were you a fan of sports early growing up? Were you did you have a favorite team? What kind of got you into this world of sports broadcasting?
Oh, always been a huge sports fan. Like that's something for as long as I can remember. I always say outside of family, the first thing I ever loved was the Atlanta Braves, right? Like that carried with me all the way. And like kids at school used to love to like treat me like a jukebox because you could ask me where any player went to college and I could tell you, right? Like they just stopped me in the hall and just see if I could get it. Teachers would stop me and ask those questions, like to just play that game. So that had always been me. I got into like sports media. A buddy of mine met the great Ralph Wiley, who was, for my money, the best sports writer ever, at book signing. And I made the acquaintance with him, and I never pushed him for any, I just wanted to talk to him. Like, I just felt like it was so special just being able to ask him stuff. And then one day he sent me something about a story, and I'll never forget because I was copied on it with Michael Wilbon, which to me was just a crazy thought. Like, this is like 2003, 2004. And I sent him my thoughts on the story and was like, well, if you want to write something about it, I know some people that can help you. And then the next day I got an email from the editors at ESPN.com who said, hey, Ralph says you can write this.
So, kind of different, though, isn't it, Bomani? Like when you start, is that how ESPN does it, or a lot of the outlets do it? Like where you'll start off in the quote unquote journalism side, and then you're a good writer, you got good ideas, and then they'll see like, oh, this guy's got a personality. Well, let's put him on camera. Is that how it works?
Yeah, but it's not really like an organized sort of thing. Like what typically winds up happening is some producer on some show reads something you did and is like, hey, let's have this person on the show to talk about this, but having writers on television is a bit of a roll of the dice.
Okay.
Right? And so you get on, and then if they like you, and then another producer of another show sees you, and then they call you, and then you start getting on. But see, then it could be interesting. You mess around and go on vacation for a week, and they forget about you in their rotation of calling people, and then they don't hear from you anymore.
Right.
So it's not really like there's somebody on high that says, hey, we've got to put this guy on television. It's really individual producers then wind up making decisions about who they put on their shows, and then it goes from there. Like I do a lot of stuff for CNN. You mess around and do one CNN show, the next thing you know, you got calls from 3 CNN producers.
Right.
CNN earlier.
Fascinating stuff, man. Do you ever think about if it wasn't for you doing this? And I want to talk about your new HBO show here in a minute as well. But if it wasn't for you being in this world of sports broadcasting, what do you think you'd be doing?
Well, I started off as a music critic, interestingly enough. And I love doing that more than anything else. Like I always say, I'll do music stuff for free. The problem is that's what they ask you to do.
Yeah.
They ask you to do it for free. Like that is the issue. I think at this point now, though, if I wasn't doing the things that I'm doing now, I'd probably be trying to get into the documentary film space. Like I'm very intrigued by the idea of telling stories in that way. Like that would be the thing that I would probably want to do.
What do you think your big break was? Was it that meeting with Michael Wilbon? What do you think, was it a certain series of events that kind of gave you your big break when you first got on ESPN?
That's interesting because I've had a lot of things that seemed like big breaks at the time. Like these little things pop up. Like I lived in Durham, North Carolina during the Duke lacrosse situation, and I was getting on TV for that. Like first time I did ESPN TV was off of that with Bob Lee. That felt like a big break. But I'd say the biggest one, like the one that was certainly the most impactful and carried to more things, would definitely be doing Around the Horn. Like Around the Horn is the second highest rated studio program on ESPN, and the thing about it is it confers an immediate credibility because all the people on Around the Horn are so credible. Like I know it's easy to kind of see Woody Page and see him do all the jokey joke type of stuff, but that is an accomplished, brilliant man. And being on the show with those people who were the top newspaper columnists in the country and being treated as a peer, that changed everything.
Dan Le Batard, for me, I became really familiar with Dan Le Batard.
Yeah, and that was big.
Do you still do stuff with him? Do you still talk with him?
I haven't done anything with Dan in a while, but we've got one of those setups. Like we did that television show together for 4 years that did so much for both of us that there's always going to be a connection between the two of us. I guess we just busy people with busy lives and a lot of things come up.
Right.
But Dan came through for me in ways that really are kind of hard to describe and at a time where it was incredibly important. And the thing I always say about Dan is that show used to be called Dan Le Batard is Highly Questionable. He took his name off of the marquee and shared space with somebody who was of similar talent than him, right? Like that show didn't exist on a hierarchy. And there aren't a lot of people who are in the space of Dan Le Batard who would be willing to do something like that for somebody younger in the way that he did for me. And that's something I'll always be just incredibly appreciative of.
That is pretty cool. I did not know that at all. Bomani Jones, tell me a little bit about this show on HBO because I'm always a fan of their programming, their sports programming, all of the above. But tell me a little bit about your new show.
We had our first episode on Friday, January 20th, and we will air on Friday nights at 11 o'clock immediately following Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO and HBO Max. And describing it in like a log line is not the easiest thing in the world because we're really doing something, I think, in a way that nobody has done. Like the overall idea of trying to do a sports show with a writer's room and all of that stuff, other people have tried that, and honestly, nobody has been successful. What I think makes ours different is I am offering the credibility that comes from, I guess, now my almost 2 decades in covering sports, but also I can carry these performance elements of this, right? And so if you ever listen to my podcast or any of the things that I do like off the cuff like that, what we're doing is we're taking those ideas and taking those expressions and figuring out what's the best way we could build those out. What's a field piece that we can write about that? What's a sketch maybe that we can do surrounding that? Hey, I've got this issue. Let's do a long essay about this that I want to talk about. We're going to get, we get into doing the topical stuff. And so it's called game theory, so people think it's like can easily think it's like homework. But
right.
It's not that. Like nobody wants homework, and I'm not trying to give it to them. I am going to give you smart stuff, but I'm going to have a good time while I'm giving you the smart stuff. So episode 1, for example, our long essay was about LeBron James and the idea of NBA player empowerment and how we've been saying about player empowerment for so long that we never stop to actually think about it. And when you look at it, the players don't actually have any power at all. And so we take about 10 minutes to run through that idea. Those are the kinds of things that we're doing. But again, I have no interest in making this something that's hard work for you. I'm making a show for people to enjoy.
A little bit of a think piece, though, correct?
Oh, no, they're thinking, right? People don't mind thinking. People don't like school.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
When you think about like a guy like Dave Chappelle, for example, Dave Chappelle's work at its best is incredibly thoughtful. but you got to make the thinking part fun.
Right.
That's what it is. So, yeah, I'll do the think piece. I have no problem doing the think piece. Everybody's doing think pieces. Some people just aren't that good at think pieces. Right? But very often, the people who are doing the think pieces aren't that good at funning.
Right.
And I'm trying to do the funning part, too.
That's definitely one of the problems that smart people have. But you don't. A big fan of HBO and their sports programming, like I told you. Bomani, what was your first job? Do you remember your very first job?
Oh, yeah, my first job, I was bussing tables at the Fuddruckers by Willowbrook Mall in Houston.
And how old were you there?
I was 16, and the man made me feel good. He paid me $4.80 an hour rather than the minimum wage of $4.75.
Wow. Do you think that shaped you in any way? Do you ever take anything you learned from that job with you today?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing was, for me, I did not have a lot of experience with, for lack of a better term, like adults who work those kinds of jobs.
Right.
You know, like my parents were professors. I was always going to go to college. Like these were the things for me. And a lot of like the grown-ups that I knew were all people around colleges and stuff like that. You know, like those are the grown-ups that I knew. I got a much different understanding of the human experience when I'm seeing these dudes who came in at 4 o'clock after they came in from their other job that they were at 6 o'clock in that morning and putting in that grind and just like that's like the biggest thing that I got from it, because I've had a good fortune, and I think that this is a really underrated part, is that American life is very segregated, but the two biggest segregations that people don't think about, one of them is language, but that's not what I'm talking about now. The other one is class, like money stuff. People tend to hang around people who got the same kind of money that they do. And that really, like, limits your thinking about the world. Like people say about I live in New York City, and how you view New York City has a lot to do with how you get around New York City. If you get around New York City and taking cars everywhere, the city looks much different to you than when you take the subway. And so what I have been fortunate in is, like, the kids that I went to school with were not from the same class background as I was, for example. So I got to see that. But that job at Fuddruckers let me see what the life was for the grown-ups, right, for the adults, what their lives were. And to really get mad at a lot of these people that folks out here wagging their fingers at, they out here working hard as hell and not getting nothing for it.
Bomani Jones, thank you so much. Big fan, and thanks for taking the time out.
Hey, no problem, man. You have a good day.
There you go. Bomani Jones. Great story, man, and pretty interesting facts there. His very, very intelligent parents, both college professors. Not only did I get away with stuff, I did things that to this day they still don't know about. Bomani Jones, probably not the case with his highly intelligent parents. And that's what I was thinking, with having, scholars for parents and, hey, mom, dad, I want to go in the world of sports broadcasting or sports journalism. I would kind of think they would be like, maybe let's go into a different direction. But he said they were supportive. They were supportive. He's a really smart guy, of course, going to get his PhD. He figured that's not something that you just do. You've got to be all in. And he figured out when he was in grad school that he wasn't all in. So PhD probably not going to be for him. Went into the world of journalism as a writer, a music writer. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I'd probably say if Bomani Jones wasn't a sports broadcaster, have his own show on HBO, his radio show, talking about sports, I do think music journalism could have been something that he ended up doing because the love, he just said it too. I would do this for free. Unfortunately, when you do something, you have to get paid for it. So but I do see the love of, writing about music. So maybe that's what he would have gone into. He says that if it wasn't for sports broadcasting, he'd like to get into the world of documentary. But I don't know if he would have had that opportunity to get into the world of documentary if not for his current career in the sports journalism / sports broadcasting occupation. How about his first job? His first job, bussing tables at Fuddruckers, which taught him something. It taught him that the people coming in to work that shift with him at 4 o'clock. They weren't just kids like he was. Maybe some of them were, but some of them were older people that had another job that they were coming from. So it kind of taught him a little bit about work ethic and the hustle, and talking about different classes of people, how the world is divided by class. How he mentioned if you're taking a car around New York City, you see the world differently than somebody taking the subway. Pretty intelligent, really, really smart guy. Got a lot out of this. I thought it was really cool. You know, he said his big break, happened to be getting the slot as a regular panelist on ESPN's Around the Horn. That was a big show. But I also think part of his big break was, meeting Michael Wilbon and then quite possibly joining up with Dan Le Batard as the co-host of that show, Highly Questionable. That's when Bomani Jones got on my radar. Bussing tables is my first job, too. I'm in the world of broadcasting. Me and Bomani Jones have a little something in common. All of us have something in common with these celebrities. At one point in time, they were all just regular people. I mean, I guess there's a rare case where you were born into celebrity, but for the most part, they were regular Joes just like us. Coming up on the podcast, I've got some great guests like actress Gina Gershon and Adam Carolla, who I really admire from his podcast. And of course, his time with Jimmy Kimmel on The Man Show. Funny, funny dude. Looking forward to that one for sure. Well, that'll do it for this week. Thanks for listening as always. We'll be back next week with another episode of Celebrity Jobber. I'm Jeff Zito. We'll see you then.